That morning, the Supreme Court chamber carried a deeper chill, not from the cold marble, but from the gravity of what was about to happen. Reporters sat packed shoulder to shoulder, cameras already whirring, hungry for the slightest flare. Then came the measured echo of footsteps across the hall. Clarence Thomas entered, and with his arrival every voice in the room died instantly. Heads swiveled. Conversations froze mid-word. He settled into his chair with deliberate calm, face unreadable except for the faint, knowing curl at the corner of his mouth, a smirk that said the outcome had already been decided in his mind. Light from above the bench caught the gold rims of his glasses, and for one fleeting moment it seemed the sun itself bowed to him. Across the aisle, Representative Jasmine Crockett aligned her notes, every page crisp, every color tab precisely placed. Her composure was razor-sharp, no wasted gesture, no restless fingers, only the steady pulse of someone who had already weathered louder tempests than this. She flicked a brief glance at Thomas, then returned to her papers, the look carrying a silent message: "I'm not here to impress you. I'm here to correct you." The gavel fell once. "All rise," the clerk intoned. Everyone rose. The overhead lights caught the vivid emerald of Crockett's blazer, a blade of color slicing through the chamber's muted grays. She was never meant to blend in. As the preliminaries ended, the tension thickened until the air itself felt heavier. Even the sound technicians shifted nervously. Thomas leaned into the microphone, voice smooth as polished stone, weighted with just enough authority to thin the oxygen. "Congresswoman Crockett," he began, "you've asked to contest this court's interpretation of its latest ruling. I trust you came prepared. This is not a classroom debate." A ripple of quiet laughter drifted from the press row. He allowed himself a satisfied half-smile. The barb had been meant to sting, and for one heartbeat, it did. Crockett lowered her eyes, inhaled slowly, then lifted her gaze again, steady, unbroken. That silent second crackled like live wire. Every reporter knew the storm was only seconds away. They weren't witnessing a hearing anymore. They were watching legacy collide with conviction. The thunder hadn't rolled yet, but its first low growl already rattled the walls. The clock above ticked with merciless precision, each second sounding like part of a countdown. Thomas leaned forward, elbows on the bench, eyes keen and measuring. The silence that followed was dense enough to suffocate. He eased his glasses down the bridge of his nose. When he spoke again, his voice remained calm, yet carried the finality of a verdict that expected only compliance. "Congresswoman Crockett, it is rare indeed for a member of the House to appear here challenging the very meaning this court has given its own ruling." He paused, lips curving into that thin smirk once more. That brand of confidence can be admirable or reckless. The words lingered like smoke. Reporters exchanged glances, pens scratched faster. Camera shutters snapped like small arms fire. Crockett remained motionless, expression impenetrable, eyes unwavering. She had been underestimated before, by men in tailored suits, by panels forged from power, by rooms never designed to amplify a voice like hers. Each time, she had forged their doubt into fuel. But Thomas pressed on, voice cooling further. "You speak frequently of equality and integrity, Congresswoman. Tell me, where was your integrity when your own district's oversight committee raised questions about the transparency of funds in your office? Are we now to take ethics lessons from someone still offering explanations for her own accounts?" A murmur swept the gallery. Even camera operators lifted their heads. Thomas eased back, his words having cut with surgical exactness. This wasn't mere questioning, it was a public vivisection. He continued, almost casually. "Young, ambitious, outspoken, I'll grant you those qualities. Yet history tends to favor those who master restraint rather than rebellion." Turning slightly toward the other justices, he added, "It's become a pattern lately, politicians confusing passion with principle." Polite but cutting laughter flickered from one side of the room. Every pause, every glance, every syllable was crafted to remind her whose arena this was. He was the law incarnate, the final, unchallenged word. But if there was one thing Clarence Thomas should have already known about Jasmine Crockett, it was this: silence was never a surrender. She shifted almost imperceptibly, fingertips pressing the edge of her binder. For a moment her gaze drifted to the towering marble columns behind him, pillars that had stood mute while centuries of voices were hushed under the guise of decorum. Thomas misread the pause as hesitation and leaned in to drive the blade deeper. "You arrive with bold words and louder accusations, Congresswoman. Yet I wonder, do you truly grasp the Constitution you claim to champion, or is this simply another performance for the cameras? Lenses zoomed. Shutters clicked again. Still, she offered no reply. She let him speak. She let his arrogance swell until it filled every corner, because sometimes silence wounds more deeply than any retort. He gestured toward her documents. You bring folders, notes, color-coded tabs. This court, however, trades in precedent, not pageantry. I suggest you remember that before presuming to lecture the bench. Gasps fluttered through the chamber. A veteran reporter whispered, "He's going too far." His colleague murmured back, "No, he knows precisely how far he's going." Thomas straightened, satisfaction softening his features. He believed he had won the room, reduced her to just another politician out of her depth among scholars. But the gallery missed what he did not, the faint, dangerous smile touching the corner of Crockett's mouth. She rarely smiled, and never from amusement. This smile was recognition, the kind that says, "I've heard worse from men who actually mattered." The clerk cleared his throat, preparing to proceed. But Crockett's hand lifted, polite, poised, absolute. "Your Honor," she said softly, "if I may respond." Thomas inclined his head, confidence still radiating. "By all means. The floor is yours." She adjusted her microphone, voice low, steady, deceptively serene. "Thank you. Because I believe it's time we all remembered something. This court may interpret the law, but it does not own it." The atmosphere shifted, subtle at first, then unmistakable. A current of electricity passed through every person present. Thomas's brow creased, he sensed the ground moving beneath him. Crockett leaned forward just enough to span the space between respect and defiance. "Since the topic is integrity," she continued, edge sharpening by degrees, "perhaps we should apply that standard evenly, to every official in this room, including those who interpret the law for the rest of us while exempting themselves." Heads snapped around. The temperature seemed to plunge 10 degrees. Reporters froze mid-breath. Thomas's fingers twitched against his papers, but Crockett paused, letting silence finish what words had only begun. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter still, and infinitely more lethal. "Respectfully, Justice Thomas, I did not come here to play politics. I came to remind this court that accountability does not end at the Capitol steps." She leaned back, unflustered, unshaken, simply ready. The strike had landed, soft, deliberate, devastating. For the first time in years, Clarence Thomas had no immediate comeback. Reporters traded glances that said, "This just became history." The silence that followed was brand new to those walls, no coughs, no rustling papers, no daring hum from the cameras. It was the silence that arrives when power changes hands. Thomas sat motionless, robe slightly adjusted in a futile reclaiming of authority, while the control he had worn so easily minutes earlier slipped away in plain view. Crockett let the moment breathe. She did not rush, did not over-explain. She simply inhabited the silence until everyone else felt it too. Her poise was not theater, it was presence. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper yet clear as a bell, she began again. "Justice Thomas," she said, steady as granite, "when I walked into this chamber today, I knew exactly how events would unfold. You would test me. You would question my right to stand here. You would label it confidence, arrogance, or theatrics, every word powerful men reach for when they never expected challenge. You've used them all." Her cadence was measured, each syllable shaped like a gavel strike. "You have served on this court for decades. Yet somewhere along the line, the law stopped being about justice and became about justification, justification for rulings that keep the comfortable powerful and teach the powerless to accept disappointment." Gasps rippled outward. Thomas shifted in his seat. "You speak of integrity," she went on, calm but unyielding. "Integrity is not measured by how long one has worn the robe. It is measured by what one does while wearing it." A law clerk behind Thomas glanced up, startled. Another dropped their gaze to their legal pad. Thomas reached for his microphone. "Congresswoman." She raised one hand, gentle but immovable. "With respect, Your Honor, I allowed you to finish. I ask the same courtesy." A few reporters actually smiled, small, cautious, admiring smiles. Crockett rose slowly, deliberately. The emerald blazer caught the light again, blazing against the chamber's muted palette. She did not merely stand, she ascended, as though the very floor lifted her. Humiliation only works, she said, when its target feels small. I do not. Her eyes swept the room. And I will not allow this court to treat accountability as optional. Thomas's jaw tightened. The gavel lay untouched. She stepped closer to the microphone, voice softening not to placate, but to cut cleaner. I did not come for a lecture. I came because people outside these marble walls still believe justice is supposed to mean something. They still believe this building stands for them. A low approving murmur rose, this time for her. Power looks eternal, she continued, until truth walks in. Truth does not shout. It does not threaten. It simply remains standing until all the noise fades. She let the words settle. Cameras captured every still frame, her unflinching face, the tremor in the air, the unease on Thomas's. Then, voice dropping to a near whisper that somehow filled the entire chamber. You said I mistake passion for principle. Perhaps what you call passion is simply courage, the kind that doesn't hide behind precedent or robes. The kind that looks you in the eye and says, enough. A collective inhale swept the room, the sound people make when they feel history turning in real time. Thomas exhaled slowly, the sound caught by every microphone. He glanced down at the papers that had, moments ago, felt like armor. Crockett straightened, shoulders squared, silence now louder than any ovation. Then, quietly but with the force of thunder. Justice is not about who sits highest. It's about who stands tallest when the system tries to break them. She gathered her notes, not from nerves, but from completion. Every truth had been delivered. Reporters in the back whispered, "Did you feel that?" She just turned the entire room inside out. Even the marble seemed to resonate differently, as if it had finally heard a frequency it was never built to contain. And when Crockett sat again, the expression on Clarence Thomas's face told the whole story. He had underestimated not a woman, not a congresswoman, but a force. A long frozen second passed. Then came the soft rustle of paper. Crockett opened the binder she had barely touched during Thomas's onslaught. Its color tabs glinted like ammunition. Since integrity is today's subject, she said softly, allow me to guide the court through a few pages of your own record, Justice Thomas. Nothing personal, simply facts the American people have already paid for. She flipped the first page. A camera zoomed with an audible click. She raised a printed chart. Financial disclosure forms, 27 years of them. In multiple filings we find trips that went undisclosed, gifts unreported, reimbursements conveniently forgotten. Minor oversights, perhaps, except the Constitution you swore to uphold demands absolute transparency. Thomas's eyes narrowed. Congresswoman. She continued without looking up, turning another page. Private jets, vacation estates, luxury retreats, each coinciding with cases involving the very benefactors who provided them. She let the arithmetic hang. No accusation. Just numbers. The gallery murmured louder. One reporter whispered, she's actually saying it to his face. You told me passion is not principle, Crockett went on, voice unshaken. I agree. So let us speak of principle, the principle of public trust. When a justice forgets that trust, the entire system forgets its soul. Thomas interlaced his fingers, projecting patience, but a muscle jumped at the corner of his mouth. Crockett turned another page. March 2017, a 5-4 decision weakening labor protections, your opinion providing the decisive vote. 2 weeks later, the same corporate lobby that cheered the ruling flew you to a private conference in Palm Springs. Travel paid, undisclosed. Gasps. Phone cameras flashed. The clerk looked visibly ill at ease. Thomas cleared his throat. Are we converting this courtroom into a campaign rally? No, sir, she answered gently. I'm converting it back into a place of accountability. She laid the binder flat, palms framing it like an altar. This is not about you alone. It is about every ruling that taught Americans justice has a price tag. The statement landed harder than any scream could have. It was revelation, not rage. She stepped back, opened a small folder, and lifted a photograph, an elderly black couple in front of a modest home, faces etched with quiet pride. Harold and Ruth Williams, she said, holding the photo steady. 40 years paying their mortgage, until a ruling stripped their community of federal protection against predatory lending. The case came here. You voted to deny certiorari. She turned the photo toward Thomas. That is not a real house gone. That is a real life rewritten by a signature, yours. The silence grew so deep it seemed the walls might fracture. She lowered the photo. When people lose homes, pensions, hope, they don't read footnotes. They watch doors slam. And if we cannot name that truth inside this building, then these marbles might as well be tombstones. Thomas's grip tightened on his pen. Another justice stared fixedly at the bench, avoiding eye contact. Crockett exhaled, not weariness, but focus. This is not rebellion. This is remembrance. Every oath we swear means nothing if it forgets whom it was written to protect. She turned the final page, highlighted excerpts of Thomas's own prior words. Your words, Justice Thomas, public confidence in the court is the foundation of its legitimacy. She closed the binder with a soft, definitive snap. Then let us rebuild that foundation, today. No one clapped. No one dared. But the center of gravity had moved. It now revolved around her. Thomas spoke at last, voice quieter than before. You've made quite a presentation, Congresswoman. Not a presentation, she replied, eyes locked on his. A record. For the first time, his response carried no swagger, only caution. Well, the record will reflect it. It already does, she said. The only sound was the frantic scratch of the clerk's pen. When Crockett returned to her seat and closed the binder, the soft thud echoed louder than any gavel. The balance had shifted, permanently. Later, when she spoke again, her voice was softer still, yet it cut deeper than ever. Justice is not theory. It is the difference between a mother keeping her home and watching it stolen. It is a young teacher crushed by student debt or freed because fairness actually functioned. It is a retired bus driver from Birmingham who played by every rule for 50 years, only to lose his pension because one signature said corporations matter more. She unfolded 3 letters, paper trembling not from fear but from the weight they carried. One she read aloud, the voice of a man who had never written a politician in his life, now begging someone, anyone, to notice he had done everything right and still lost everything. Her silence after the final sentence wounded more than any accusation could have. That man is not a headline, she said. He is America. Then, almost conversationally. I was raised by people like him. Fairness was never a miracle we expected, just the bare minimum we were promised. She stepped closer to the bench, heels clicking like a countdown. This building was meant to remind us justice is blind. Somewhere along the way it stopped being blind and started being selective. When justices accept gifts from billionaires and then rule on their cases, that is not an oversight. That is betrayal. Thomas watched her, composure cracking for the first time. She rested her hands on the table's edge. You called me passionate. You're right. I am, because I have held mothers who lost homes, veterans denied benefits by loopholes you preserved. That is not passion, Justice Thomas. That is pain. The words rolled like low thunder, not loud, but seismic. Then she turned from the bench to the cameras, to the nation watching. This is not about Clarence Thomas. This is about every name buried in fine print at the bottom of an opinion, every family crushed beneath power wearing the mask of law. If truth makes people uncomfortable, good. Comfort built this silence, and silence built this rot. She drew a breath, then delivered her closing line of the day. I am not here to humiliate anyone. I am here to remind every soul watching that the law remains sacred only when it shields the powerless. The instant it stops, it is no longer law. It is theater. She looked Thomas dead in the eye. And I do not perform for applause. She closed her folder. The chamber seemed to vibrate with the aftershock. Thomas had no reply, because every word she had spoken was no longer aimed only at him. It was carved into the conscience of an entire nation. When Jasmine Crockett stepped back from the microphone, the hall understood what history would one day write in bold letters. This was not the day a congresswoman argued with a justice. This was the day she spoke for justice itself. By the time the hearing adjourned, Washington wasn't burning with fire, it was burning with headlines. Within hours every network looped the same 6 words on repeat: I don't act for applause. Hashtags erupted. Approval ratings for the court plunged overnight. Phones in Crockett's Dallas office rang without pause, veterans, single moms, regular citizens leaving tearful messages that simply said, "Thank you for saying what we could not." At the Supreme Court the next morning, Justice Thomas arrived early, head down, ignoring the cameras for the first time in decades. And in a dimly lit office far from the marble halls, Jasmine Crockett sat quietly, binder still open on her desk, while her aide rattled off interview requests from every major network. She didn't look up. "Let them talk," she said softly. "I've already said everything that needed saying." A pause. Now it's their turn to listen. Outside, on the Supreme Court steps, citizens gathered, not with torches, but with candles, holding signs that read, "No justice above the law."